see all you bright and shiny faces here looking to live longer. I'll just get right to it because we have a very limited amount of time. But I thought it'd be fitting to start off with the oldest member of this panel because he is the poster child. You are the poster child of living longer and living life to the fullest. So if you would be kind enough to reveal your age.
I'm going to be 90 in October, and I ran the marathon 2 years ago.
Ran the marathon. And you've gone to Burning Man.
And I went to Burning Man, and I got married last month. That's the best news.
So this is why you want to live longer. And you
I don't understand why we don't have Shaquille O'Neal's attendance. For this subject, it's important.
It is. You want to live until you're 114.
114, that's what I said in my book. No red lights, which you can buy on Amazon.
By the way. But just sort of, if you can give us the overview, why do you think that's possible today? Because I would think that even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, maybe 114 would be ambitious.
Well, it's interesting that you have it say it in that context. We were just discussing the fact that, what was your comment? For 1 year of research, you had 1 year of life, which is an interesting thought as to why people could live longer. In fact, David Sinclair came out just recently and said he thinks there's someone, he's the guru in this world of longevity, that there's someone alive today who will live to 150. The oldest person alive, as far as I know now, is 122, is that right?
117, but she was 122 when she died. No. Jan Kalmol.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got to figure that one out. She was 122 when she died, but she's 117 now.
That's the current oldest person.
But my personal feeling is I keep very active. I work full-time, running a new firm called, well, it's 3 years old, called Primetime Partners, which is about to raise another fund. So I'm thinking in a 10-year cycle, and I certainly have at least 10 years. But I really believe it's having a positive attitude. Your mindset that you have to wake up every day and have a positive attitude and keep yourself active and think you're going to live to 114. And I really mean that. I live my life like I've got 24 more years to go. So I do everything anyone else would do who has that long a lifespan ahead. That's why I got married. I promised my new wife 24 years.
All right, keep your promise. A positive attitude is great, but drugs help, certainly, which is why we have biotech investors on this panel. Jim, if you can sort of give us an overview of your point of view in this space and where you see the most promising breakthroughs to come.
Well, the most important thing for all of us in this room is to stay alive for 10 years because it will take that long for very effective what some people would call anti-aging drugs to come into wide dispersal, but coming they are. The scientists have worked out what the key pathways of aging are, at least some of them. All of them seem to be malleable. They can be adjusted, and there are about 200 longevity companies, of which I would say about 50 are legit, that are out there working on some really exciting products. There's no one magic bullet. There'll be multiple pills to begin with or multiple therapies, but we're getting there. And so just stay alive for the next 10 years, and wow, it's going to be incredible. And as I said to Alan earlier on, at some point, an extra year of life will be garnered by the research that takes place in a year, and that's called longevity escape velocity. And we're not far off it. We are the first cohort on the planet for which biological intervention in aging is going to be possible, whereas all the improvements in healthy lifespan and longevity have occurred as a result of environmental factors up till now. But very, very soon, some of these things will work. But there are lots and lots of charlatans out there. There's not enough money coming into the sector relative to all the other money going into drugs. And it does take conferences like this and platforms such as yours to remind people that healthy lifespan and the longevity of our friends and family is among the most important things that we could be accomplishing in this world. And we do face a massive demographic crisis in the developed world. Populations are going to plummet. So we've got to keep people alive for longer and fitter. because there just won't be enough young people to do the jobs. So it's very important that people, and Alan is a fantastic exemplar of that, carry on working for as long as they can, preferably into their 100s. We're just at this cusp point, so just hang on in there.
Yeah, and I do want to get to the Alzheimer's drugs that you are focused on, but it seems like there is I don't want to say magic bullet, but a very promising drug currently available, and those are the weight loss drugs, the GLP-1 agonists, and that in and of itself will prolong, I mean, that is a major step, Arsani.
Someone told me yesterday, an authoritative source, that is going to have we don't invest in drugs or anything related to the FDA. We only do products and services. That Ozempic and those type of drugs is going to have an amazing impact on longevity and in many areas of now, not just diabetes or obesity, but in lots of different areas.
Yes.
I
mean, reduction of
more
cardiac
than I do
events,
about it.
sleep apnea. I mean, there's so many applications.
I agree. So as a perfect, and excuse me for the cough. We just landed at 1 a.m. last night. What I would say is that the weight loss drugs have actually been around for quite some time. And so the first approval of these drugs was really in 1995, 1996. And the GLP-1s and the GIPs, these are endogenous hormones that are produced by your digestive tract. In fact, they have a half-life of a couple minutes, and we're secreting them at all points in the day. The big pharmacological innovation behind this was how to expand and increase the half-life so that you can give yourself a once-a-week injection, or potentially in many years in the future, an oral that will induce the exact same effects that it has in terms of appetite suppression, slowing down gastric emptying, eliciting, for example, a state of homeostasis to where you have lower blood sugar than you otherwise would have. And so what are the impacts of this? And we're beginning to kind of see what Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly are running and the results from the phase 3 clinical studies that they're proving out. And one of the biggest ones came in October of last year, and that was Novo Nordisk's SELECT study, to where they took Ozempic or Wegovy, basically two names that are for the same exact drug called semaglutide, and ultimately across 7,000 patients over the course of 5 years showed that you could limit cardiovascular stroke, heart attack, peripheral arterial disease, and catheterization by over 20% by just taking a once-a-week injection. In addition, if you took a look at all-cause mortality, death not related to cardiovascular risk factors, it dropped by 19% for patients that were on the drug versus those that were not. And so for 10 pounds of weight loss, you'd ask the question, why is there such an inherent nature for more or less getting these dramatic improvements in longevity? And does increasing longevity or increasing metabolic homeostasis actually lead to a better life with less chronic disease in the end? And it's proving to be that the answer is seemingly more and more yes. Eli Lilly is going to come out with their results of tirzepatide, or as many of you might know as Zepbound or Mounjaro, the two branded names for the agent for diabetes and weight loss. And their weight loss on that drug, because it's a combination agent, is even more profound than what we've seen in Wegovy. So we'll see if that translates into a greater relative risk reduction for cardiovascular health and ultimately all-cause mortality. The big thing I think that we're realizing from these drugs is that this age-old paradigm of caloric restriction, or I'm not sure how many of you are doing intermittent fasting, that there is something to actually putting our cellular states within a stressed environment to where they're not consistently having to metabolize and oxidize sugar so that they can pursue something called cellular autophagy, and that's spring cleaning. It's clean up for the cells. And what we're finding is that caloric restriction overall can actually lead to a reduction in inflammation and a reduction of something called free oxygen radicals, which lead to, I would say, cellular aging and decay, and ultimately, hopefully, translate to a longer and more healthy life.
Yeah, it feels like this class of drugs has really helped sort of change the conversation around obesity as a disease, as an epidemic facing the United States, as opposed to everybody has the willpower to put down the food. That's not what it is for many, many cases here. But we're sort of in between, because even though we can think of obesity as a disease, these drugs are not universally covered by insurance. And so that leads inherently to discrepancies, particularly when it comes to lower income, higher income, who can afford it, who has access, Leslie? And that's one of the points of contention that you have. These are groundbreaking drugs, and we can think about this and apply it also to any other drugs in development, Alzheimer's treatments, whatever. It's a matter of who has access to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, I'm actually a patient. I actually had a pulmonary embolism about 5 years ago, and it was my first introduction to the whole healthcare system. And I was lucky. I live in New York. I was able to get access to really good clinical care, but it introduced me to the first time ever how many people don't have access. And so while these drugs, all these new things that are coming down the pike are really exciting and are groundbreaking and can change people's lives, we just need to remember that we need to get it into the hands of those who need it the most. And the statistics around different groups are really bad. We know that Black Americans, as an example, much higher rate of obesity, much higher rate of kidney disease, diabetes, et cetera. And so making sure we get all of this into the hands of those that need it, is really important.
Yeah. Jim, in terms of what you're working on, GLP-1s will prolong our lives, but what kind of life will we have? Everybody's worried about, your body not keeping up. And that's sort of where one of your focuses is.
Yeah, well, thank you. So basically, we've got two lead drugs, if you want to put it like that, both of which we think will have very positive anti-aging capabilities. But the problem with anti-aging drugs is that we live a very long life, and therefore no company can stay alive for 30 or 40 years to see if their drugs work from an anti-aging point of view. So you go after near-term commercial application. So just very briefly, we have one drug which is an inhibitor of something called PI1, and it was observed that the Amish population here in the United States has a subsector which has a natural inhibition of PI1, and they live 10 years longer than their counterparts. And so everyone's been looking for this PI1, and we found it, and it has near-term application in fibrosis, which is a very big problem, as you know, but it probably also has a very positive longevity and health span effect. But the one I'm particularly excited about is Alzheimer's drug, because everything that kills us typically, which is cancer, heart disease, obesity, is being gradually addressed and in a very effective way. And we're used to preventative medicine, particularly in cardiovascular, with cardiovascular drugs such as statins or blood pressure pills and so forth. But Alzheimer's is the one thing we should all be worried about, because when you're over 85, you have a 50% chance of getting dementia. And it is the most burdensome thing for the family, the caregivers, the person, and for the healthcare system. So something needs to be done about it. And the drugs that have been developed so far, plaque inhibitors, are not very effective. But it's a huge potential market because there's more and more older people who are over 85. So we worked out that plasmalogen levels in people over 85 that are high leads to very low rates of Alzheimer's, 5% typically. Plasmalogen levels that are low leads to something like 60 or 70% levels of Alzheimer's. So we've worked, the people I work with have worked out a way of supplementing using prescription drugs, this plasmalogen level, to offset both decline from Alzheimer's and to potentially stop you from getting it in the first place, and certainly reversing it when you've got it. So this is the most exciting thing I've ever been involved in, and it could have a major impact on humanity. So Alzheimer's is the one thing that everyone should be worried about, or dementia. And it's very, very exciting to be working on doing something to combat that.
Will we see a treatment in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so PI1 is in the IND filed this week. Will be in the clinic within the next couple of months. So PI1 is something that's really interesting, but particularly for fibrosis patients, and there are plenty of those in the world. In terms of Alzheimer's, I would think in 5 years the drug would be on the market if it works.
I have a slightly more conservative viewpoint on this, and my wife, I just said I just got married last month, but my previous wife, who I was married to for a very long time, died from Alzheimer's 3.5 years ago. And everything Jim's talking about is true, but it is perhaps slow it down, give you an extra few months. but it's not going to. I don't think there's a cure for Alzheimer's on the horizon.
Well, there isn't yet, but we have got these amazing positive signals from the
Within
stuff that
5
we're
years,
doing.
you think we could possibly have a cure?
Well, because, I mean, we developed the most effective drug for migraine here in the United States, which is now on sale. And we did the whole thing in 8 years, from imagining the molecule to having it on the market. And I think that with Alzheimer's and the patient advocacy groups and the fact that the government really wants to do something about it, everyone wants to do something about Alzheimer's, you can probably get an accelerated path, if it works, to market. But obviously in biotech, everything is uncertain.
So everything that's gotten huge attention so far amounts to slowing.
Absolutely.
And
So
is it-
that's why I'm saying they're not very effective.
And they're all early onset.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel passionate at that because I lived with Alzheimer's for 12 years.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So I think what you both are saying is that we all want to live a longer life, but no one wants to extend their life from 80 to 100 years old, like you are so privileged to have, Alan, if they're going to be in consistent cognitive and physical and emotional decay. And so what are potentially things that we can do sort of as an art of living, and then what are the pharmacological add-ons and interventions that we can have? And in that case, dementia, Alzheimer's, and cognitive decline are such a big thing. It affects over 20, 30 million Americans. And the two drugs that have been approved, which are Leqembi and donanemab, which is up for FDA approval, which focus on beta amyloid, or targeting these plaques that are in the brain that are associated with more or less Alzheimer's progression, they don't do anything but reduce the slope, or they slow that cognitive decline. And quite frankly, if you're not a neurologist and you're testing 2 patients over the course of 3 years, you may not know the difference of whether one patient is on a drug or another. The tricky part, I think, with a lot of these illnesses is that the illness is in and of itself in a state of maturation before it manifests. So for many patients, they've been building plaque, I would say, in their brains for 15, 20 years, up until the point of then they do forget where their keys are or where they park the car, and then you go for a beta amyloid scan and you realize that this is a culmination of many years of impact. And so to your point, Leslie, I mean, if there is anything in regards to how to live a longer and a better life, is there going to be a single miracle drug? I don't really necessarily know the answer to that, but I do know that there are major pharmacological inventions and interventions that can assist with our art of living for obesity, and potentially, hopefully, that will come from.
So my question to you would be, is it less about Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or kidney disease and more about inflammation and controlling that?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a doctor that was a mentor of mine back at the MGH that literally believed that inflammation was the cause of almost any given disease, like from autoimmune disease to cancer to anything. You could ascribe basically a root cause of inflammation. And inflammation is, the way that I like to think about it, is it's this silent alarm that just never goes off. It's like when you wake up in the morning and your phone is buzzing and you click it off and you know that the alarm is going to continue, clicking onwards and onwards, and it's pervasive. And so the world of inflammation, actually, from a pharmacological perspective and from a biotechnology industry perspective, has just exploded, like over the course of the last 5 years. And more companies are focusing on inflammatory pathways. Of course, everyone knows what ibuprofen and Advil and Tylenol are, but new interventions are being made to kind of figure out why cells are put into this chronic state of inflammation, and what is that leading to in terms of neuroinflammation that can lead to disease like dementia, Alzheimer's, and potentially inflammation of metabolism that can lead to irregularities in how the pancreas secretes insulin and vice versa.
So should everybody in the audience be treated or tested for inflammation?
Not a bad idea to go get a standard CBC and blood test.
What everything you're saying, we're all saying, is, and why there's a really pretty big audience here, probably bigger than you would have had last year or the year before, is that I think we're all focused much more on living longer, and we are going to be living longer. And if you're going to be living longer, where we're very focused is what are the products, services, technologies that are going to take care of these people. I mean, just what you said, there are so many people who have neurological problems. There aren't enough neurologists around. You've got to find alternatives for how to take care of these people. Caregiving is an enormous challenge right now and the thing that people miss all the time is the percentage of people sitting in this room who are caregiving for somebody, whether it's a wife, a grandparent, a child. Caregiving for the average citizen has become a major function. It takes away from employment time. you've got to have services, you've got to prevent loneliness for these older people. All these are challenges that are opportunities, frankly, for all of you for investments.
It's interesting to think that there's a whole new demographic that will be born from living longer. All of a sudden you have people who are 85 and up, and that's a new cohort of consumer, right, that you are basically trying to support.
The number of people living over 100 will quadruple in the next 10 to 20 years. I mean, and you know, what are they going to do? How do we keep active? Hopefully some will be working, but others are going to have to be cared for in a proper way.
Jim, I'm curious in terms of the money. There's so much money in this general space. Did that heat up after the mainstream success of GLP-1s? Was there sort of this realization that you know, these drugs or drugs like them that prolong life, that improve life, can have such a tremendous impact and be such a humongous market, basically?
Yeah, it definitely has picked up, but it's still a tiny fraction of the overall amount that pharma companies spend on research. So the pharma industries around the world spend about $200 billion a year on research, and of that, about $2 billion is on trying to address health span and longevity, which is nothing. So it's about $500 million a quarter coming into the sector. But the good news is that rich guys who are reaching a certain age, like Jeff Bezos, they want to live rich for many more years. So they're putting money into this, which is great because the money has to come from somewhere. And Bezos has put $3 billion into Altos Labs, which has got the best of the best people to do reprogramming of cells. So if you can turn cells back to their sort of almost infantile state, the idea is that, you know, people will be rejuvenated that way. And there are 14 companies like that, of which Altos is the biggest. So the market, the total addressable size of the market is absolutely infinite, really. The GLP-1s will be $100 billion in sales this year, but for anti-aging drugs, it could be $600 billion a year, and we need it. Last thing I'm going to say, if I may, Melissa, is that in 2070, which is not that far off, half of the G7 population will be over 65 years old. That's almost a given. Half of everyone on the planet in the developed world will be over 65 years old. Something has to be done.
Leslie, do you think most of the work will be done in the private sector and not, you know, by pharmaceutical companies? And why aren't the pharmaceutical companies? We see the tremendous market, the tremendous demand for the weight loss drugs. Why wouldn't they see then the tremendous demand for the drugs that prolong life?
So I think it's going to be a combination of everything. It'll be some private, it'll be some governmental, it'll be some public. I don't think it's going to be one sector per se that controls this. I mean, if you look at the weight loss drugs now, that's basically controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. But the drugs that are in process are more on the venture side of the equation. So, you know, I just think that as these issues are coming to light, you're going to see the combination of all these groups eventually coming together, and that hopefully there'll be government funding for it. I just want to circle back to one thing that Alan said, talking about, because Jim and I had this conversation earlier, about life expectancy and the amount of people over the age of 85. The reality of the situation is that the life expectancy in the United States has actually decreased a few years. Now, granted, that could be related to COVID and what have you. But in terms of G7 or developed countries, we're actually not at the top of the list. So it's a little bit of a conundrum that we're in terms of, you know, the United States is really driving, I think, a lot of this ingenuity in the space. But yet our own life expectancy has actually decreased. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that.
The pandemic affected something in terms of life expectancy, and I see the same statistics you do, and it kind of runs counter to everything else you see. And the fact is that people, as they say, people seem to be living longer, have more money to spend than anybody else. It's a far more affluent audience than the millennials or the Gen X's, and we see so many opportunities for investing in things that deal with this older age population. I'm amazed. One of the things I just want to throw out is that, which I've learned in the last few years of running this fund with my partner, is that the health plans are doing everything they can to keep people out of the hospitals. Falls, for example, are the biggest problem, bigger than a lot of diseases is after you get a certain age, falling can really put you in the hospital, pneumonia, sepsis, and it's over. And they will spend anything, if you're a member of one of the health plans, in supplemental services that they pay for just to keep you out of the hospital for a day, because there's so much cost in a hospital stay. And they'll give you exercise classes, they'll give you learning classes, they will come up with anything that they call supplemental services, and each one competes against the other to provide supplemental services, again, to keep people well.
Last word, Arsani.
Yeah, look, I think that we're coming into a world to where everyone's talking about AI and artificial intelligence, and there's no greater $3 billion letter book than the human DNA and human genome. And there's good news in the sense that there's few diseases that are actually imprinted to where you will 100% be penetrated and express that disease just based on your genetic encoding. Most different genetic polymorphisms increase or reduce our susceptibility based on environmental factors to disease and to morbidity and mortality. And as we understand that, and I think as there's new inventions and innovations along many of these spectrums, from things in inflammation and cognitive disorders and obesity, hopefully we'll have more insight that we can combine with modern innovation to kind of yield really good results. The last thing that I'll say maybe is that, we did talk about the G7 and how there are disparities by both race, and I would say that just the amount of inequity that might exist with access to these treatments. The one thing that's going to be really important to watch is legislation, and how much does the government actually more or less make a move into these very large categories that have yet to be seen before. There has been, price negotiation by Medicare and Medicaid that was approved last year, and so we'll see how the industry responds and works together to actually enhance societal benefits for all, not for a few.
Good point.
Thank you all, Leslie, Arsani, Jim, and Alan, who will be here for the next 24 years doing this panel.
On stage.